$31,500,000 is gone, Vader, and your signature is on every transfer that moved it. Archer Strauss, 42-year-old chief investment officer of Strauss Capital Partners and husband of Vader, dropped a thick folder across the formal dining table before she had taken her seat. The room had been arranged carefully. Her usual chair beside him was missing. Ciara Dent, 33-year-old acquisitions director at Strauss Capital and Archer's mistress, occupied it instead, a champagne flute in her hand. No one touched the food. The Strauss family crystal caught the chandelier light and held it, untouched like a theater prop. Vader Cole Strauss, 36-year-old director of the Cole Access Foundation and wife of Archer, remained standing at the far end of the table, beneath a ceiling light, bright enough to expose every expression. She had been positioned there deliberately. She understood it the moment she saw the chairs. The folder was full of altered records, shell company formation documents bearing her foundation's registered address, false wire authorizations carrying her identification number, a vendor company named Cole Medical Solutions, designed to echo her non-profit close enough to confuse a casual reviewer, and her signature, copied, lifted from an old grant application, placed on documents she had never touched. Greta Strauss, 67-year-old matriarch of the Strauss family and Vader's mother-in-law, looked across the table with an expression she had spent 8 years perfecting. "You came into this family with nothing," she said. "We should have asked more questions." Vader turned toward Archer. "You know I didn't build those records." Archer looked away. He had rehearsed this moment. He did not improvise. Clifford Bain, 57-year-old Strauss family attorney, and the man who had filed the divorce petition 4 days earlier, placed 3 documents in front of Vader. The petition already bore Archer's signature. Beside it was an acknowledgement of service. And beside that, a proposed settlement requiring Vader to surrender the marital home, waive all financial claims, accept responsibility for the missing funds, and remain publicly silent about the Strauss family. Vader read each page. She picked up the pen. She signed the acknowledgement, confirming she had received the petition. She signed the separate consent, confirming she agreed the marriage should end. When Archer pushed the settlement toward her, she set the pen down. "I signed to end this marriage," she said. "I will not sign your lie, give up my rights, or confess to a theft you built yourself." Archer had expected her to crumble. He had watched her carry grief quietly for years. He believed quietness and surrender were the same thing. They were not. Moments later, Strauss Household Security emptied her handbag across the table. A black USB drive tumbled out and came to rest beside the crystal. Ciara spoke immediately. "That contains the company ledger files she copied before the transfers." Vader looked at her. "No one has opened it. How do you know what's inside?" Ciara's answer came one beat too late. "I recognize the drive casing. It's company equipment." Demi Strauss, 27-year-old communications associate at the firm and Archer's younger sister, stood near the doorway. She had seen a drive exactly like that 2 weeks earlier. She had seen Ciara carrying it. Her lips parted. Then Greta gripped her wrist beneath the table. Before Demi could speak, the dining room doors opened. Detective Selma Rourke, 44-year-old financial crimes investigator, entered with 2 officers and a warrant that had been issued 5 days ago. Archer had known the arrest was coming before he invited Vader to dinner. He had not invited her to give her a chance to explain. He had invited her so photographers could catch her leaving the house in handcuffs. Cameras were already waiting outside the gate. Calvin Hurst, 51-year-old financial crime attorney and legal advisor to Vader's family trust, entered behind the officers and identified himself as counsel. Vader looked at him once. "Tell the independent committee at Hearthstone to preserve every Strauss account record," she said. "Full preservation hold. Independent review only." Archer smiled at the words. He thought she was performing. He believed she knew someone at Hearthstone Medical Group, perhaps a sympathetic contact, perhaps an old family connection, and that it was invoking a name to sound important. He did not know what that name actually meant. Officer Devon Tate placed the restraints around Vader's wrists. She did not look at Archer as the metal closed. She looked at the empty space where her chair had been, at Ciara sitting in it with her champagne, at the unsigned settlement still resting on the mahogany surface. Then Archer reached for Ciara's hand. That was the moment, the last thing Vader still carried for him, finished leaving. 16 months earlier, the employee benefits platform at Strauss Capital Partners had stopped processing. The failure happened on a Friday morning, which meant 312 employees would not receive their health insurance premium payments before the weekend. For one woman named Adele, 54-year-old accounts processing specialist who had served the firm for 19 years, It meant her husband's dialysis authorization would not renew in time. Veda was delivering the keynote at the Coal Access Foundation's annual scholarship luncheon when her phone buzzed. Archer's message did not include a greeting. The benefits routing system your foundation audited last quarter is failing again. If the charity performance is done, come show you're useful. 12 scholarship recipients were about to walk across that stage. Veda had written the speech over 3 weeks. She handed it to her deputy director without a word. "Present every award," she said quietly. "Tell them I'll meet each of them before the end of the month." Then she left, because 312 people had a problem that could not wait for applause. 20 minutes later, she sat inside Strauss Capital's financial operations room. Orlan Pike, 48-year-old firm controller and Archer's closest internal ally, blamed Hearthstone Medical Group for rejecting the emergency credit extension. Vernon Strauss, 72-year-old chairman and Archer's father, stood with his jaw set. Greta stood beside him, arms crossed, watching Veda the way she always watched her, as if expecting to catch her doing something small and embarrassing. Archer pushed a thick compliance report toward her. "Find the discrepancy Hearthstone is using as an excuse." Veda sat down and read. She found the problem within 6 minutes. The firm had counted outstanding receivables as settled income. A short-term credit draw had been excluded from the debt-to-equity calculation, and 3 vendor payments, flagged under strategic consultation, had been processed through entities with no established track record and no audited financials. She turned the pages. The vendors were named Strauss Growth Advisory, Dent Strategic Partners, and Cole Medical Solutions. She read the third name twice. "The income projection is overstated," she said. "The liability exclusion makes the balance sheet look cleaner than it is. And these 3 vendors, I need their origination documents." Orlan gave a flat laugh. "Institutional financing is more complicated than grant budgeting." Veda kept her eyes on the report. Hiding an obligation doesn't strengthen a balance sheet. It only moves the problem to the next quarter. A junior analyst checked her numbers and nodded carefully. "She's right." Archer's face shifted. "Everyone out." The room cleared. Greta left last, muttering that Veda enjoyed embarrassing her husband in front of staff. Demi stayed in the doorway for one extra moment. She looked at Veda with something that wasn't quite surprise, more like recognition. Veda rebuilt the report. As she worked, a memory moved through her. Her father, Wilhelm Kohl, 66 years old when he died, standing beside her inside Hearthstone's risk management division when she was 14. He had refused to raise her as a figurehead. He walked her through claims processing, underwriting disputes, provider network negotiations, and fraud detection protocols. During her first benefits audit, she had treated the numbers like a homework assignment. Wilhelm placed a photograph of a family beside the spreadsheet. "Every line belongs to someone's life," he told her. "When the numbers lie, ordinary people pay first." That lesson was why she had left the scholarship luncheon. It was also connected to a truth Archer did not know. Publicly, she was Veda Cole Strauss, a quiet foundation director his family considered financially inconsequential. Privately, she was Veda Cole Reinhardt, controlling beneficiary of the Cole Family Trust. The trust owned 74% of Hearthstone Medical Group, a private healthcare holding company with a market valuation of $3.8 billion. Archer knew she had a protected premarital trust. He had signed their marriage agreement without reviewing the sealed disclosure attached to it. He assumed it held modest investments, perhaps a property or two, nothing that would challenge Archer and his understanding of their dynamic. The final succession restriction on the trust had expired 40 days earlier. Veda had planned to tell him the truth on their 9th anniversary. She had written the letter. She was carrying it. She did not know yet that someone had already begun building a crime around her name. Calvin Hurst spread 5 access records across the archive table in the basement of the Coal Access Foundation. Veda stood across from him beneath fluorescent light. Someone had requested copies of her passport, her tax identification records, old foundation signature cards, historical trust correspondence, and her father's death certificate. The requests had moved through Strauss Capital's estate planning office. None of them were necessary for a standard marital estate update. 4 months ago, Archer borrowed your passport, Calvin said. He told you Clifford Bain needed it for a beneficiary update. Veda's stomach tightened. She had given it to him without question. Calvin opened a second folder. The final restriction on the Cole Trust expired last month. You may now publicly identify yourself as Hearthstone's controlling beneficiary whenever you choose. Veda looked at the sealed anniversary letter she had prepared. She had planned to hand it to Archer over dinner. She wanted him to hear it from her. Her full name, the trust, the company, the life she had kept quiet behind simple clothes and unremarkable routines. "I still want him to hear it from me," she said. Calvin did not argue, but his concern was visible. On the wall behind him hung a photograph of Wilhelm Cole standing outside Hearthstone's original headquarters, one hand resting on 11-year-old Vader's shoulder. She remembered the week that photograph was taken. A business profile had identified her as Wilhelm's only heir. 2 days later, a man had followed her home from school. Wilhelm had moved her immediately, pulled her from public records, enrolled her under her mother's maiden name, placed the trust inside 3 layers of holding structures known only to a small circle of trustees and regulators. Vader had learned to live without displaying wealth. Later, when her mother died, she kept the name Cole because it carried the woman who had stood between her and the world every time the world moved too fast. Before marrying Archer, she had told him she owned a protected premarital trust. He had smiled and said it didn't matter. He said he cared about who she was, not what she had inherited. For the first 4 years of their marriage, she believed him. Then the gratitude faded. He began presenting her financial analyses as his own. He called the foundation her hobby. He stopped correcting his mother's remarks about Vader's background. After Ciara joined the firm, his schedule became opaque, his phone became private, and every direct question from Vader became evidence of her insecurity. She had delayed telling him about Hearthstone each time a new crisis appeared. Now she was beginning to wonder whether she had been waiting for a man who no longer existed. At the firm's annual leadership reception, 5 days before the family dinner, Vader stood near the service corridor with her anniversary letter inside her handbag. Ciara stood beside Archer before the evening began. She adjusted his tie, handed him his drink without being asked, and unlocked his private tablet using a code she had evidently memorized. A bracelet circled her wrist. Vader had seen a charge for it on a shared credit card 3 months earlier. Greta approached near the window. "Ciara understands what Archer needs," she said, loud enough for the people around them to hear. "She doesn't spend her time managing other people's problems." Archer glanced at Vader. "Don't make a scene." Vader had not spoken. Later, Demi appeared beside her near the coat room entrance. "Did you open a company called Cole Medical Solutions?" she asked. "No." Fear moved through Demi's expression. "I saw the name in a media briefing Ciara asked me to prepare." Ciara appeared behind them before Demi could finish. She looked at Vader with a calm, measured expression. "Company media files aren't appropriate to share with outside parties." "I'm Archer's wife," Vader said. "That doesn't give you access to firm operations." Demi looked at the floor and walked away. Vader left the reception, then she remembered the letter. She went back to leave it in Archer's private office, hoping one honest conversation might still save something between them. The outer door was unlocked. Voices came from the inner room. She stepped close enough to hear. Archer and Ciara, together, clearly not for the first time. And then a sentence that kept Vader still when she should have left. "Once she's charged," Ciara said, "Hearthstone will assume the missing money has been explained and drop the compliance review." Archer's voice unhurried, certain the family already sees her as an outsider who married into something she didn't earn. "They'll believe whatever I put in front of them." Vader's grief turned cold. On the desk through the glass, she saw copies of her passport, old signature cards from the foundation, a black USB drive beside a folder labeled with her initials. Beneath it, a draft statement with the words "Foundation Fraud" already printed in the header. She photographed what she could see through the glass before Archer noticed her reflection. He stepped back from Ciara. He did not look ashamed. "How long?" Vader asked. He adjusted his jacket. "Our marriage was over long before you noticed." Ciara moved beside him. "Wearing his last name doesn't make you his equal." Vader did not answer. She almost told him exactly who she was. Then she remembered Calvin's warning. If Archer knew she controlled Hearthstone, he could move to destroy records before the institution could preserve them. She left without giving him the truth he had never earned. She called Calvin from the parking garage. He told her to change the foundation's security codes, preserve every message, document every missing record, and send the photographs through an encrypted channel. "Don't confront the Strauss family alone," he said. "They may be preparing more than a divorce." That night, Vader returned to the marital home for her essential belongings. Ciara arrived 20 minutes later with a key and an overnight bag. She walked directly to Archer's private office without being shown the way. Then Vader saw her mother's ring, the one she had left in the jewelry drawer. It was on Ciara's hand. "Take that off." Ciara looked at her own hand. Archer gave it to me. It was sitting in a drawer. It belonged to my mother. Ciara removed it slowly and dropped it on the entryway table as though it carried no meaning. Archer stood in the doorway. Come to the family dinner Sunday. Corporate, and perhaps this stays private. Vader picked up the ring and walked out. Calvin's message reached her before she reached his car. The USB drive in the compliance case file was purchased through a Strauss Capital internal equipment order. Authorization signature, Ciara Dent. Do not touch any device they present to you Sunday. The dinner was not an attempt to repair the marriage. Someone had already built her a seat at that table, and it was not the seat of a wife. $31,500,000 is gone, Vader, and your signature is on every transfer that moved it. She stood beneath the light at the end of the table and did not look away. The folder was detailed. It was also wrong. One authorization email had a creation timestamp that came after the date printed in its header. A routing sequence matched a Hearthstone transfer protocol the institution had retired 18 months earlier, and her signature, the one Archer presented as proof, contained the exact same slight pressure variation as the old grant application, the pen skipping once in the same direction at the same angle. It had been copied, not written. She said none of this aloud. She listened to Archer reframe 8 years of their life in front of his parents, his attorney, and 2 board members who had been invited to make the accusation look official. Every time Vader had helped him, he turned it into evidence that she understood how to conceal something. Every time she had asked a direct question, he made it proof of guilt. You came into this family pretending you had nothing, Greta said. You were studying us the whole time. Ciara lifted her glass. Quiet women are always hiding something. Vader looked at Archer. Does everyone here also know you've been sleeping with her? No one spoke. Archer did not deny it. Ciara understands what I carry, he said. She understands my world. Ciara placed her hand beside his on the table. We intend to be together after this ends. The handbag, the drive tumbling out, Ciara's voice immediate and certain. That's the company ledger data she copied. Vader turned toward her. No one has opened it. How do you know what's inside? 1 second of silence. 1 second where Ciara's composure disappeared before she recovered it. Then Detective Rourke entered with the warrant. She read the issuance date aloud. Archer had filed the complaint 5 days ago. He had arranged the dinner after the arrest was already coming. The photographers outside the gate had been contacted before the drive was found. Calvin entered after the officers and identified himself as counsel. Preserve the drive's chain of custody and serial number, he said immediately. Preserve entry logs for this property, digital fingerprints on that device, and every original document in the warrant package. Vader could have announced that she owned Hearthstone in that moment. She chose not to. Ownership would not prove innocence. Revealing it before the forensic team had finished its work would give Archer reason to argue that the institution had manipulated records to protect her. Tell the independent committee to preserve every Strauss account record, she said to Calvin. All login credentials, physical tokens, transfer authorizations. I am fully recused. Independent review only. Orland's expression shifted when he heard the words independent committee. Archer only smiled. Officer Tate placed the restraints around Vader's wrists. She looked at Archer one final time. She was not looking for remorse. She was looking for the man who had once carried boxes at a community health fair and eaten a plain meal with her instead of attending his mother's charity gala. The man who said he didn't care about inheritance, only effort. She did not find him. Archer reached for Ciara's hand. Ciara sat in the chair that should have been Vader's. The last loyalty Vader still held for him, released like a breath she hadn't known she was holding. The television in the detention area replayed the footage on a loop. A news anchor described Vader as an obscure non-profit director who had allegedly used her marriage into a prominent investment family to orchestrate a multi-million-dollar diversion. The photographs supplied by the Strauss family showed Archer at industry events and corporate milestones, while Vader stood at the edges, easily cropped out of frame. The report did not mention that the second transfer, $11 million, had been initiated while Vader was surrounded by 7 witnesses at the family dinner. It did not mention that Ciara had identified the contents of a sealed drive before it was opened. It did not mention that Vader had left her own scholarship ceremony to fix the firm's benefits failure, or that Archer had publicly taken credit for the resolution. A detention officer lowered the television volume without being asked. You don't have to keep watching, she said. Vader looked at the dark screen. They're not reporting what happened. They're reporting what someone handed them. She had seen this before. Wilhelm had taught her about it. a Hearthstone employee, had once been publicly accused of fraud before an internal review was finished. Wilhelm had refused to terminate him until the evidence was examined. An accusation becomes dangerous when powerful people repeat it before the truth can be checked. At the time, she had thought he was teaching her about banking. She understood now that he was teaching her how quickly a person's name could be taken away. Her tears came quietly, not because she feared losing Archer's house or his family's approval. She was mourning the trust she had given a man who used it against her, her passport, her grief, her mother's ring. He had borrowed all of it and returned none of it. Bridget Quill, 47-year-old independent forensic accountant engaged by Hearthstone's risk committee to examine the Strauss transfers without Vader's involvement, laid the findings across the conference table 3 weeks after the arrest. The second transfer had been authorized through Orlan's credentials using Archer's physical security token. Building entry records placed Archer inside his private office at the exact moment of authorization. Vader had been visible on dining room security footage when the transfer processed. The USB drive serial number traced to a batch order submitted through Strauss Capital's equipment procurement system, authorized by Shapra Dent. Shara had entered the coat room alone, with Vader's handbag inside, 14 minutes before the search. The shell company Cole Medical Solutions had been incorporated using a copy of Vader's passport, an old foundation signature lifted digitally from a grant record, and a physical address she had not used in 6 years. The recovery email for the account had been created from a workstation on Strauss Capital's executive floor. Money from the shell vendors had paid for Chiara's travel, a property Archer had been planning to purchase privately, and a series of payments to Orlan that matched the dates of his documented gambling debts. Demi had already sent Calvin a private file, photographs of Chiara burning documents behind the Strauss property, a partial image of a USB drive, and a draft of the press statement accusing Vader. The statement had been written and approved 2 days before the family dinner. Calvin looked at Vader across the table. Before the arrest, she had asked him to keep the affair private unless it directly affected the financial case. He waited. She looked at a broken photograph in her hands, taken the week after her mother's funeral. Archer standing beside her in the rain outside the chapel, promising she would never grieve alone again. She had stayed through years of diminishment because part of her still believed in the man who had made that promise. Now she understood she had been loyal to a memory. The real man had been slowly becoming someone else for years. "Stop protecting him from what's coming," she said. Calvin closed the folder. At exactly 9:15 on a Thursday morning, Archer entered Strauss Capital's primary conference room to finalize the largest acquisition the firm had signed in its 30-year history. Senior partners, outside counsel, and counterpart executives sat across the table. Archer set his Hearthstone authorization token beside the signature folder and entered the access code. The dashboard turned red. Account access suspended, trois machine under independent fraud-review. Credit facility. Contact independent corporate counsel. He tried the acquisition account, the reserve line, the operating fund. Each one gave him the same screen. His token had not expired. The system had deliberately removed him. He called Hearthstone's main line and demanded a senior officer. Hearthstone's risk communications director answered and explained that his credentials had been flagged in connection with transactions under court-authorized forensic review. The credit facility had entered default proceedings. Payroll for all Strauss Capital employees had been moved into a protected disbursement account and would not be affected. But no new borrowing was available, and no restricted transfers would be released under his authority. "My family has had accounts here for 22 years, Archer said. "That history doesn't change the present risk. Restore my access, or I'll move every Strauss account out of your institution. You don't currently have the authority to move them." The token sat on the conference table in front of the acquisition partners. Archer had built his identity around the assumption that institutions needed him more than he needed them. That morning, he discovered the distance between an assumption and a fact. His fingers were trembling when Orlan appeared in the doorway. "Who authorized this review?" Archer asked. The controlling beneficiary of the Cole Trust requested full independence and recused herself from every operational decision. Orlan hesitated. "They said you'd meet her tomorrow morning." "Him," Archer said automatically. "The Cole Trust's beneficiary." Orlan looked at him carefully. "They said her." The Hearthstone boardroom was full when Archer arrived the next morning. His family's attorney, his father, his Ciara, and her attorney, Orlan with his own counsel, 2 firm board members who had been present at the family dinner, all seated before a transaction map displaying every shell company transfer in sequence. Money flowing from Strauss Capital through Cole Medical Solutions, Dent Strategic Partners, and Strauss Growth Advisory into Archer's private accounts, Ciara's personal expenses, and Orland's debt payments. At the head of the table sat Alaric Kine, 73-year-old chairman of Hearthstone Medical Group's independent governance board, who had known Wilhelm Cole since before Vader was born. Hearthstone has served Strauss Capital for 22 years, Alaric said. That relationship deserves careful treatment. It does not require blindness. Archer placed both hands on the table. Then bring me whoever approved this review. I want to speak with the person who controls this institution. Alaric glanced toward the boardroom doors. They opened. Vader walked in beside Calvin Hurst and Hearthstone's chief compliance officer. She wore a cream blazer and her father's watch. She did not smile at the family that had watched her leave their dining room in handcuffs. Archer stared at her. For several seconds, he appeared to be trying to understand why the woman he had discarded was standing inside Hearthstone's governance chamber as though she had always belonged there. Alaric rose. The independent directors rose with him. Vader Cole Reinhardt, Alaric said, controlling beneficiary of the Cole Family Trust and principal owner of Hearthstone Medical Group. The room went silent. Greta gave a short, disbelieving sound. This is something she arranged. Vernon Strauss did not react the same way. He knew the Cole name. He had once sat in a meeting where Wilhelm Cole turned down a profitable deal because its terms would have destabilized a regional hospital network's pension fund. Vernon looked at Vader and finally saw what he should have seen years earlier. "You are Wilhelm's daughter," he said quietly. Archer's face lost its color. He thought of the sealed trust disclosure he had never read. Vader's detailed knowledge of Hearthstone's compliance requirements. Her private calls in the Foundation's lower office, the way she had rebuilt Strauss Capital's benefits report without anyone asking her to. Her instruction to Calvin as the handcuffs closed, preserve every Strauss account record. Every clue had been present. He had ignored them because accepting Vader's capabilities would have required him to reconsider his own importance. "You lied to me," he said. Vader took her seat beside Calvin. "I told you before we married that I owned a protected family trust. You never told me what you planned to build with my name. You let me believe you had nothing." Old pain moved through her. At 11 years old, she had been followed home from school because a magazine had published her father's estate plans. Wilhelm had moved her immediately, removed her from public records, rebuilt her identity around her mother's name. Wealth had stopped feeling like freedom. It became a target attached to her. "I wanted to be loved as Vader," she said, "not approached as Wilhelm Cole's heir." She explained that the succession restriction had expired. She had planned to tell him everything on their anniversary. She'd been carrying the letter to his office the night she found him with Ciara and saw her own passport on his desk. "I was late," she said, "but you were never intending to stay." She looked at him steadily. "I concealed the size of an inheritance. You manufactured a crime and used the state to imprison an innocent person. Those are not equal things." Archer had no answer. Bridget Quill activated the evidence display. Archer's token on the second transfer. Ciara's credentials changing beneficiary information. The copied signature identical pressure variations proving digital duplication. The cloned device generating a false login from Vader's home address. The USB drive chain of custody leading to Ciara's procurement authorization. The press statement dated 2 days before the dinner. The courtroom entry log with Ciara inside it, alone 14 minutes before the search. Then Ciara placed a file on the table. She had found it in Archer's locked desk drawer when she went looking for bank correspondence and discovered something else entirely. A contingency document framing her as the sole architect of the vendor fraud, acting without Archer's knowledge. He had prepared it before the dinner, in case the first story failed. She had contacted prosecutors the morning she found it. Her cooperation would reduce her legal exposure. It would not restore her career, or the assets purchased with stolen money, or the future she had believed she was building. She looked at Archer. "You told me that after she was gone, we'd have everything." He said nothing. "You prepared documents to blame me before she was even arrested," Ciara said. "You made your choice first." Their alliance collapsed in front of the family. Orlan, who had already admitted through separate counsel to manipulating the firm's compliance reports, refused to look at Archer. Demi sat very still and did not look at her mother. Vernon read the transaction map from the beginning and did not speak for a long time. He had spent his life protecting the Strauss name by keeping its failures private. He saw now what that silence had created. Archer had grown certain that reputation mattered more than truth, because everyone around him had repeatedly protected him from the consequences of being wrong. The independent Hearthstone Committee voted to restrict Strauss Capital's extraordinary transfers, remove Archer, Chiara, and Orlan from all authorization access, place the credit facility under default review, and require the firm's board to appoint temporary financial supervision. Payroll for all employees remained protected. Essential supplier payments continued. The legitimate operating business survived because Vader had asked the committee to protect the workers before she left the room. Vernon resigned as chairman and accepted the restructuring conditions. He submitted a written statement to firm employees, acknowledging that his obsession with family reputation had prevented him from questioning Archer until the damage had already reached the courts and the press. His statement did not erase what happened, but it gave employees something the Strauss family had denied Vader at the dinner, a public acknowledgement of the truth. Greta came to Calvin's office 2 days later and asked to speak with Vader. Her voice was unsteady. "If I had known who your father was, I would have treated you differently." Vader looked at her without anger. "The woman you humiliated deserved fair treatment before you knew what she owned." Greta lowered her eyes. Even her apology measured Vader's worth through inheritance. Some people only knew how to value a person by what they could verify in a document. Demi came separately, without asking to restore anything. She sat across from Vader and said what she had come to say. "I saw Sierra go into the coat room. I knew the press statement existed before the drive appeared. I sat at that table and said nothing because my mother held my wrist and told me one sentence could destroy the family." "You thought silence would protect them," Vader said. "Yes. It made their lie powerful enough to put me in a cell." Demi accepted it without argument. She had sent the evidence before learning who Vader really was. Vader left room for that. Trust, however, would not return on the strength of a single honest conversation. The criminal charges against Vader were formally dismissed. Her civil claims, defamation, identity theft, coercion, conspiracy, moved forward under Calvin's direction. The divorce proceeded on the terms she had established at the dinner. She had consented to the marriage ending, nothing more. Not to the settlement, not to the confession, not to his version of their 8 years. Archer was indicted on charges of wire fraud, identity misuse, conspiracy, and obstruction. Orlan faced separate fraud charges. The afternoon Archer was arraigned, a news crew captured him outside the courthouse while a Hearthstone public notice played on a digital screen across the street. M1 Health Benefits and Payroll. Fully prot under independent supervision. The woman he had framed had protected the workers and preserved the honest parts of the firm he had nearly destroyed. She had simply refused to protect him from the consequences. Several months after the Strauss accounts changed status, Calvin entered Vader's office at the Coal Access Foundation with the final divorce order. Vader signed the receipt. Archer had once lifted her signature from an old document and placed it on records designed to destroy her. Now her genuine signature marked the legal end of his claim on her future. She walked into Hearthstone's headquarters the following morning. For the first time, she entered publicly as Vader Cole Reinhardt. She kept Cole because her mother had given it to her. She carried Reinhardt because she was no longer afraid of the name her father had built. Hearthstone employees rose as she crossed the lobby. Some had known her since childhood. Others had known only the quiet foundation director accused of stealing from an institution she secretly owned. Vader stopped before them. "I'm not here to run this institution through personal authority," she said. Hearthstone remained trustworthy because independent people followed evidence even when the owner was under investigation. That standard applies to everyone, including me. She accepted a governance role focused on fraud prevention, employee protection, healthcare access, and financial literacy. Independent directors retained their authority. She did not place herself above the structure her father had spent a lifetime building. Inside her office, she set Wilhelm's watch on the desk beside a photograph of her parents his lesson had held. Operating systems remembered whose token approved a transfer. Security footage remembered who entered a coat room. Chain of custody records remembered where a drive had been before it appeared in a handbag. Accounting records remembered where stolen money actually went. Archer had believed those records would bury Vader. Instead, they had refused to forget him. At the Coal Access Foundation's first ceremony under its expanded mission, Vader stood before a full room. Scholarship recipients, Strauss Capital employees, families helped by the foundation, people who had believed in her before they knew what she owned. No seat had been removed. No bright light isolated her at the far end of the table. No one searched her bag before she entered. She lifted the pen. The same signature Archer had stolen now created the Cole Reinhardt Financial Justice Initiative, legal support for people falsely accused through corporate fraud, emergency resources for identity theft victims, forensic accounting scholarships for women entering compliance and financial law. The room applauded after she signed. Vader looked out at the faces. Her silence from that point forward would not mean she was enduring. It would mean she had finally found peace. The following morning, before the building filled, she walked through Hearthstone's operations floor. Claims processors, benefits coordinators, compliance analysts, ordinary people doing careful work so that other ordinary people could receive the care they needed. Nothing about the room was dramatic. That was exactly the point. The truth had not defeated Archer through spectacle. It had moved through preserved records, independent review, and people who eventually chose honesty over loyalty to a lie. In a pre-trial holding facility across the city, Archer sat before the same transfer maps he had once believed would destroy Vader's name. Every shell company was visible. Every copied signature was visible. Every payment to himself and Ciara and Orlan was visible. The accounts had never been a weapon. They were witnesses, and witnesses do not forget. On Vader's desk, when she returned to her office that afternoon, a new file waited beside Wilhelm's watch. Across the cover, someone had written in careful handwriting, "Urgent. Employee accused through falsified benefits records. No resources. Nowhere else to turn." She opened the first page. Her marriage was over. Her hiding was over. But the truth had already found the next person who needed someone with enough power and enough patience to listen.